Hi, so in this video I'll be discussing utility maximization, what this means and how it's useful for our economics purposes. So we tend to make the assumption in economics that our economic agents are utility maximizers, but first we need to sort of realize what this means. So let's, for instance, suppose that we are going to define a utility function. And what we mean first, it would be useful in discerning what we mean by utility. This is a term that we maybe use day to day, and it's just going to mean sort of well-being or the happiness of individuals. So if we maximize utility, we're maximizing our happiness. But when we think of happiness, usually in a non-economic context, it's just this sort of arbitrary, someone's happy or they're not. Whereas if we're maximizing utility, we're actually doing, or we're making choices, and we're actually maximizing some function of utility, and we might measure our utility in some units, which we might call a util, but this is just some fictional made-up unit, and the actual units of measurements themselves don't really mean anything. 1 util and 10 utils don't necessarily have a meaningful difference from each other than the fact that 10 is more than 1, and we want to get the highest amount of utility that we possibly can. So if we have a utility function, it says that we get utility maybe from goods, from services, and what we mean is we get this sort of satisfaction or this happiness from good services. We might get it from holidays, or for watching a film, for example. All of these we can make a function of these. So for instance, we could have a simple function where we have the number of goods we consume plus the number of films we watch plus the number of services plus the number of holidays, and this is going to equal our overall utility u. And this is obviously a very vague utility function, because what are these goods? Well, surely we get more utility from certain films than others, but I'm just giving you a basic utility function we could have. Perhaps we value goods more than films, so we put this to the power of 2, we square this term, and so on. But this is obviously not a very good utility function. Nobody's preferences are actually going to be given by this, but it's just supposed to give an idea that we can have some sort of function of our utility, and we are going to try to maximize this. We want this u to be as big as we can possibly make it. We want to maximize our utility. And how are we going to do that? Well, it's going to be through consuming as many goods, as many films, as many services, and as many holidays as we possibly can, given our budget. So, for example, if we move on to this point here, we can say that consumers are just wanting to maximize their happiness, as I've said, and we can create a function which approximates happiness, and this will be different for every single person. Everyone has different preferences, and so on. But it doesn't just stop at individuals. We can think about firms and how they are maximizing their utility, but our utility function of a firm may look very different from this sort of utility function of an individual consumer, because a firm doesn't really consume goods in the same way, and we can say that a firm only really cares about its profits, so they are maximizing their profits. And in a future video I'll come up to discuss this a little bit more. And we can also think about governments maximizing their utility as well, and a government will get utility from social welfare as a whole, not just one individual's welfare. And so when we are making this assumption that individuals maximize their utility, we often also make this assumption that individuals are rational. And an individual is rational, if we define this term here, if they only make decisions in order to maximize their utility. So we come up with this utility function, which could be some good x plus some good y plus some good z. Maybe we value these goods slightly differently, maybe one's raised to the power. We could have some complicated function of what we're consuming, what we're doing, and this gives us utility, as I've said before. But an individual is only rational if, given this utility function, they are making decisions which maximize their utility. If this consumer is given a choice between 1 unit of X or they can consume 1 unit of Z, Well, they're going to choose this unit of z, most likely because this is multiplied by 3 and it's squared, so 1 unit of z is going to give them 3 utility, whereas 1 unit of x is going to give 1 utility. If we just substitute those in, of course this will change if we already are consuming certain amounts of goods, and it's a lot more complicated than is making out, but hopefully this brief introduction has given some idea of what we mean by utility, what we mean by utility function, and what we mean by someone that is wanting to maximize their utility function. And if that person is doing that, then we can start to think about them being rational. So hopefully this video was at least somewhat useful. Please do drop a like if it was, that would be very helpful to me. Check out the playlist for those future videos that I've hinted at in this video, and do subscribe for lots more economics content.